to call the public session of the September 23rd Board of Education meeting into session. If we could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if we could, we'll move straight into approval of minutes. May I have a motion, please?
I'll go. Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the minutes from the August 16, 2019 Board Workshop and August 26, 2019 regular session.
May I have a second? Thank you, Ruby. Does anyone have any edits or comments on the minutes? With that, all in favor, please? Thank you. At this point of our agenda, we are open for public comment. I will go through the rules just for the sake of the record. It is public comment. It is not a two-way discourse per the rules of our public meetings. Let it be noted we do not have anyone requesting public comment at this time. And then now, Bill, would you like to introduce our students?
I sure would.
Thank you.
We are lucky enough to again, and I don't know when this started, it certainly predates me, but it's a wonderful part of what the Weston Board does, which is to have two non-voting student members. So I met, it feels like 3 weeks ago, it was last week, Ms. Woloch and I sat with Chelsea Greenberg and Graham Fay to do a general orientation, and as I think they'll remember, I had a very simple word or phrase, bring us the truth. Right? That's what I said. And try and bring it respectfully and with dignity. And some of you were here last spring when some students brought the board the truth, and I complimented the students for being very challenging, but frankly setting an example for adults as to challenge and don't hold back, but do it with dignity and respect. So we talked about a few things that I don't think the board wants to hear about, orange soda, food choices, which not too far from here, students have asked for it for boards, but rather real, substantive matters. So but I stress that what you say is what you say. And there may be times during the year that later in the agenda, there may be items you do want to comment on. So what I've asked Chelsea and Graham to do is to look at the agenda ahead of it, and sort of on the Friday flag for me if there's something where they may, beyond their opening comment, make some contributions to. So, and I also said the chair is very good about bringing you into the conversation. But welcome, and I guess it's for the chair to turn it over to you, so it's back to you to maybe go back to them.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, it is with great pleasure. This is one of the highlights of our evening, is when we get to hear from our students. Yes, it is only our high school, but our high school students represent the culmination of our students' travels on the school road throughout our district. So it is with great pleasure, Chelsea and Graham, I welcome you to your tenure as our student reps to the Board of Ed, and I look forward to your report.
Thank you very much. So I've shaken all of your hands, I think, by now, but I am Graham Fay again. Chelsea and I are the co-executive presidents of student government. And a little background about me is I would say, heavily involved in sustainability. I've actually been working with the Sustainability Committee on our town government, and I completed the Sustainable CT Planner to get us certified among other towns. I believe Stamford is one, Westport, Greenwich, and I've actually done some of this in the school. In my sophomore year, we earned CT Greenleaf State certification, which basically included me documenting all the sustainable purchasing and activities of our school and kind of making notes on how to improve those less impressive ones. And then this kind of culminated into last year. We put together a large club called the Green Team, which is, it was all of the, it's essentially a coalition of all of the previously existing environmental and stewardship clubs into one, and we made this large composition which we sent to the United States Department of Education, and we were actually one of only 25 public schools in the nation to earn Green Ribbon National Certification. I will actually be traveling to Washington Wednesday to get the ribbon with a fellow student, the vice principal, and the AP Environmental Science teacher.
Hi everyone, I'm Chelsea, and like Graham said, we're the co-executive presidents for the high school. So I'm really interested in both mock trial and music. For music, I'm part of the band program. I play 3 instruments, and we're going to New Orleans later in this year. We're really excited about that. And as for mock trial, I'm on the A team. We usually get to state finals, so fingers crossed that we get there again this year. We're excited for the new members joining us. And then as well as that, what I'm mostly involved in at the high school is Weston Against Cancer. So when Relay for Life pulled out of our town 2 or 3 years ago, because of a lack of funding, we decided to start our own club that fundraises for Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center rather than the American Cancer Society. And over the past 2 years, we've raised a bit over $30,000 for Memorial Sloan Kettering towards a general research fund. And just last week, we had our whole board go to Metro Noodle Bar in Stamford for the grand opening. And Metro Noodle Bar did a fundraiser for all their locations where they would tack 50 cents onto their ramen bowls, and that 50 cents went to our organization. And we made a little bit under $9,000 from that, and we got a big check. It was really fun and really cool. So we're super excited about that, and we're having our 3rd annual event at LaShawtown Farm this June, early June, probably around June 8th, and we're really excited for that. Yeah.
May I ask a question? I know there's a reason for the shirts, because I was in the... Oh, I'm sorry. Chair, go.
No, I was just going to say, I love the shirts, and if you could take a moment and explain the significance behind the shirts.
That was actually coming right up on our agenda. And so this was actually Miss Wolak's idea. She wanted to really, her big theme is actually humankind, and along with that, be in the moment. She wants kids off their cell phones, enjoying the school, enjoying each other's presence, and I mean, we think it's a pretty good initiative. So we, along with her, had the idea to distribute these shirts, which read "Humankind, Be Both," to all of the students before our Trojan Kickoff Pep Rally, the first Friday of the year. And it was actually really awesome. I'd say like at least 90% of the students were wearing these shirts. We went outside, took our unity picture and the unity lap in them, and yeah, I think it's just setting a very good tone for what we expect from the students this year and what we would like to further, this idea of being kind.
So kind of along that line, we are really trying to push spirit this year among the student body because we've gotten a lot of complaints that our school isn't as spirited as it could be as other neighboring towns. So we decided to hand out these shirts the morning of to see how many students would wear it as opposed to handing it out a few days before. And actually, like Graham said, over 90% of the students wore them, which was really cool. And we're really pushing this spirit with our homecoming week. So homecoming week, I believe, is the week of October 21st. It's the last week, full week in October. And what we are going to be doing for that week is we're not only going to be doing school events during the day with different events at night and different sporting events, and then our homecoming game on Friday, but we also want to work with the PTO to potentially do a kickoff the Sunday before. So we were thinking, or we're working with Ms. Troxel, the head of the PTO right now, to organize potentially a kickoff that has food trucks and different live bands that come play, students from the school especially. And we'd love to have not only students from our school, from other schools, but people in the community, potential alumni come to kind of engage in the homecoming spirit, because we're really trying to push that this year. And in addition, we are also working with the PTO for their annual pie fundraiser. They want to really, really push sales this year, especially since they felt that their attendance went down a little bit last year. So we've been working with Ms. Troxel as well as our PTO liaisons. There's 2, Lindsay Greenberg, my sister, and then AJ Solinger. And they are working alongside us and Ms. Troxel and Ms. Wolak to push not only this pie fundraiser, but push this kickoff event and other ways the PTO can help out with us throughout the year.
another big initiative we have coming up is the week of or actually starting this week until the end of this week, we have the Start with Hello initiative, and this is to kind of combat social isolation in the high school, which, if I really do say, there does not appear to be much of that. Mr. Phillip and I, on another note, have been working to help the new to district kids get accustomed with the new environment, and we actually attempted to hold a buffet kind of during lunch, and we personally invited all of the new students. I sent out like a nicely worded email to them, and we waited during all 3 lunch waves, and no new students showed up, which we take as a good sign, because I guess that that means that they have their own friends and don't really need us to be forcing them into any social activities. But the Start with Hello initiative is just like, it's essentially saying that if we see anyone sitting alone or someone that looks like they could use the support of another human being, to just simply start with hello.
And adding on to that, we're working to try to figure out ways in which the grades can interact with each other. So I believe on Wednesday we have an advisory period. So the sophomores and the juniors are signing up for and registering for the PSAT. But the seniors and the freshmen are having joint advisories. They're combining, and it's kind of going to be a cool icebreaker to make us big bad seniors seem not so scary to the freshmen, and to try to make us seem more welcoming and inviting to the freshmen so that they can ask us if they have questions, because I know when I was a freshman I was terrified of the seniors. So I'd love to be able to reach out to a lot of them, and hopefully they'll be able to reach out to me. And then kind of along the lines of that, we have we not only want to push this Start with Hello campaign with students in Weston, but we have new students from our sister school in China coming to Weston High School. They're our Chinese delegates, so teachers and students are coming, in which we are currently looking for families to host 2 students or 2 teachers at this time, and this will be the week of October 2nd through the 5th. Yeah. And that's all we have to say. That's all we have planned. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the rest of tonight's agenda is pretty much just regular routine business. So please feel free to head out and take care of anything you need to deal with for school tomorrow. And we look forward to seeing you back in October. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, and thank you once again for the opportunity of having us here.
Thank you. I'm so glad.
So next up on our agenda is a ratification of the tentative agreement between the Weston Board of Education and the Weston Administrators Association for collective bargaining agreement effective July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2023. So just a little bit of background. Here in Weston, we do have 3 separate unions, one of which is our Weston Administrators Association. We have the Weston Teachers Association, and then ASME, which is a lot of our support personnel within the district. This year we did have negotiations with the Weston Administrators Union as their contract was expiring. The members of the Board of Education on that committee were Ellen Usinoff, Melissa Walker, and myself. We started working back in early July towards this resolution. It was a very collaborative process between the board and the administrators' representatives. And tonight, the Administrators Union has ratified this agreement, and now it is up for the Board of Ed to officially vote on it. The pertinent terms of the agreement, the first year of this agreement, there is a general wage increase of 1.9%. The next 2 years of the agreement, the wage increase is 2.25%. The other stipulation is as it relates to the premium contribution by the employees. For the first year, it will be at 18% for health insurance, and then accelerate to 19 and 20%. For dental insurance, the first year will be 19%, and then we'll accelerate to 20% and 21%. I think this just represents further collaboration with our administrators. They understand the pressures that we as a district are facing, and they worked with us to continue to do what's in the best interest of the Weston Public Schools. It was a very professional process and just really, really productive meetings on behalf of all the parties involved. Melissa, would you like to add anything?
No, I think everything that you've said is absolutely true. It was a win-win for everybody, and we look forward to continuing to work with WAA.
May I have a motion, please?
Move that the Weston Board of Education ratify the tentative agreement between Weston Board of Education and Weston Administrators Association for a collective bargaining agreement effective July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2023.
May I have a second, please? Thank you, Taffy. Any further questions before we vote? All in favor? Great. Thank you. And just as a matter of public record, this contract applies to the administrators, basically are school-level administrators who are part of this union, but Weston has a long tradition of the central office administrators receiving the same compensation increases as matched to this contract. So just as a matter of public record on that note. Are you pinpointing that, Sarah?
Yes.
Thank you.
You ready?
Yes.
So next agenda item is an annual review by the board. This is pretty standard at this point. There are no changes in the MOU. If Lewis were here, he would handle this. It's actually at this point quite straightforward. There are no adjustments in it. We would recommend as administration that the board proceed and approve this MOU. I would add, you had an update at the last meeting from Chief Henyon, Captain Bردacki, about our relationship with the Weston Police. I sometimes overstate things. I'm not overstating it now. It's extraordinary. That they are here as law enforcement. They're here also as educators. We're fortunate to have quite a veteran police chief who understands us. He's all over the campus regularly. Captain Bردacki is some, I think, 20 years in service in Weston. Is that accurate? Something close to that. They changed the command structure a year ago so that the SROs report directly to Captain, which even in a small police force has helped strengthen that. The two SROs, while based at the middle school and high school, do move throughout the district. Separate from this arrangement is a campus police officer, formerly known as the Mile of Safety. That you may still hear that phrase, but it's really a campus police officer. So we have 3 full-time officers on this Mile Square campus, and then Captain Bردacki and Chief are present constantly. But most importantly for this is the SRO relationship. And final comment is just those particular officers are selected by the police department, but they are generous to allow me as part of the interview process. And you have a veteran in Jason. He was formerly in New Canaan and overseeing SROs there. And when that opened up, came here, Officer Kim said, I would like to reapply, so we're lucky to have him at the middle school. And then Officer McGowan is now going into, I think, his 3rd year as the SRO at the high school, and again, does a very, very good job.
May I have a motion, please?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the memorandum of understanding between the Weston Police Department and the Weston Board of Education regarding the School Resource Officer Program and authorize the chairperson and superintendent to execute the agreement.
May I have a second, please? Second. Thank you, Ruby. Any further questions or comments regarding the MOU? Great. All in favor, please? All right. Great. Thank you. Next up is the Senior Center MOU.
Again, I'll handle that. Louis Bray has been working on this. Again, this one is standard. Often, if there had been any changes to it, it would have come up through the facility committee for review and discussion, but there are none. I think what's important about the board, and we would recommend you support this and agree to it now, is that while we're in a lot of discussions over this next year about the use of facilities in Weston, it assures the senior center that we are supporting them. This MOU does allow the board to make a change if it needs to, but the senior center can know, and residents of town can know, they would have full and ample warning and plenty of lead time. So I think in the least, this assures critical citizens here, and the work of the senior center being as part of the Hurlbut facility predates me as superintendent. I actually think it's a very healthy intergenerational piece. I know there was some discussion and debate about that, but I think it's a wonderful example of how to maximize space and bring multi-generations while in separate parts of that building into close proximity. So I think it's been a positive. It remains a positive. I would urge the board to again endorse this MOU because it will assure key residents in the town that while we think about different use of the facilities, we will not do that lightly relative to our senior citizens.
Thank you. May I have a first, please?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the memorandum of understanding between the town of Weston for the town senior center and authorize the chairperson to execute the agreement.
May I have a second, please? Thank you, Taffy. Any further questions or comments? All in favor? Thank you. Update on school start and end times. Dr. McCursey?
Thank you. I was able to get to you Friday. I hope you had a chance to look at it. A 6-page document. I tried to footnote the parts that were repeat parts, one so I don't get accused of plagiarizing myself, but also just to help you move through it and help other readers of it. I did send this to the entire staff on Friday so they would have it, because something of this magnitude I want to make sure the staff's aware of. I also had reminded the WTA Executive Board and Doug Pregman that this was in process when we had met last week. You may recall that my fairly brief what to expect statement that went out at the beginning of the year had flagged the school start end time as a key topic for the year. What's critical for you here, again, it's an update. We may well have very ample discussion about it, is I'd urge you to go to page 2. It's a listing of the task force membership. We do have one update. This is such a desirous task force to be on that Laura Cadis has bumped Patty Falber, and Laura Cadis will now be the elementary representative on this. It was actually a trade. Patty's going to work on the sustainability committee because, as you've heard from Graham, and you may have understood, I've endorsed now a new district-wide committee on sustainability, and Patty's very committed to that. So that's I'm going to use win-win a lot tonight, but that's a win-win. I've also reached out to AFSCME. I've not heard back yet, because then all of our bargaining units would be potentially represented on this task force. A couple things to stress about the task force is it is advisory to the superintendent. It will be a consensus-based approach. I am waiting to hear back from both the WTA and the PTO, who said they would identify representatives, understanding these guidelines as I've shared them. It's important that there be balance between, I'm using for now, upper school, lower school on this. The importance of the consensus, particularly for the PTO and the WTA, is, and actually WA as well, because they're represented through Laura, and Lisa, is that it's not voting, it's consensus, and also anybody coming to this body should come to it representing a larger set of ideas, not their own agenda. And we're trying to have that happen. I've listed here resource groups for the task force. That could be any number of the cabinet members on specific issues here, but Ken and Phil have agreed to be on the task force. First Student Bus Company has agreed to provide all the transportation analysis, which is critical in this. They've done that for other districts who've gone through this consideration. The Weston Police Department has agreed to provide formal and informal, I stress that balance, traffic studies and information. On that, you may know that the town has been doing its own traffic study as it relates to planning in terms of the town center. Chief Henyon advised me last week that there may be some fresh information and data on that that could be very, very helpful to us. And then I checked this today with a few of my colleagues, and they said, yes, you can list it in the document. I said, well, thanks, you already put it out, it's in there. Is that there is a group of us superintendents who informally want to think regionally. It's not act regionally. I mean, some people who care about this issue have said if all the districts could decide at once to do this, it might make life easier. That's not going to happen. But at least that we can think regionally. And I'll already share a little bit of their thinking when I get down the list here. So, and that's a brand new resource. Some of us have lived this in other districts, and we were kind of alone as it relates to other districts. So that'll be a plus. At least several superintendents are saying privately, let's sit occasionally to help each other out, think through these things. I've talked a bit about the guidelines. Again, I want to stress it's consensus, it's non-voting. It is a recommendation, a recommending body to me to bring to you as a board a recommendation. At this point, you don't see a board member listed here, and often in these types of topics and issues, it's easier for the board to be at the receiving end fully of the advice, because that gives you the most flexibility to move on it. I will be bringing monthly updates. There'll be plenty of opportunity to weigh in and have discussion. If you want to change that, we're fluid here. I'm not saying don't have a board member, but again, thinking regionally in other districts, it's often been easier for the board to be watching, listening, asking questions purely from the board level, knowing you're going to be at the receiving end of this, and you will be the ultimate arbiters, decision makers on terms of whether we do this. As Ken had flagged in last week's curriculum committee meeting, we'll also use a committee process here. There may be things we're trying to understand that we bring up through the committees, and I think that'd be most likely, well, it could be any of them, frankly, as we work through this. The other thing I would flag here is it's an aggressive schedule. We said to potential task force members, plan to meet every other week. The rhythm on that, I think, will help. We're going to try and make it not a heavy work burden for the task force members, but more they're the thinkers and reactors to what's brought to them. So with that couple-week slot between each of these meetings, will give us a little time to get work done. But I do warn people that as we head towards that deadline, we may have to increase the frequency of meetings. You can also see that task force members will have to, barring illness or things, attend the public meetings. They will be posted and listed with an agenda as public meetings with opportunity for public comment, not public discussion, but public comment. The focus groups, which I think we will run, we wouldn't have all the task force members there because it might overwhelm that, but that was the one sort of flexibility point. I'll get through all this and we can have questions and discussion, because no doubt there'll be. The guiding questions, how do you think and frame this? We've been doing a lot of work on this now for a couple years. The survey last year, and Ruby, you had some very good questions on corrections tonight, which we'll get to, on sort of particulars there. But that was a very informative survey. Response rate was good, and it clearly said that we cannot simply go down the path of the 15, 20-minute adjustment here, which would bring you for the high school to an 8 o'clock start, and it's laid out here on page 3. It really opens up another question. So I've tried to frame these here in as simple and a very complex topic as simply as possible. And that is, first, what are the pros and cons of shifting the start-end times of school for all buildings to this 15, 20-minute later? And I list very specifically the times. 2, what are the pros and cons of shifting the start-end times of school for all buildings 45 to 50 minutes later, which gives you the 8:30 start at the upper school level? But it would potentially push under that question the elementary starting as late as 9:20. So that opens up a third question to consider, pros and cons of pushing to that 8:35 start for the high school, and then, but a flip. So you would flip them, and thus the 8:35 is because prior to last year, we understand that we have which relates a little to some of our transportation problems this fall, we need an additional 5 minutes between our 2 waves of buses. So if we make a change in start time, we could fix that. But the idea with question 3 is, what are the pros and cons of flipping, which you could see would be an earlier start for the elementaries as opposed to the upper school. And districts that have considered trying to get your adolescent students, your middle and upper school students, high school students into this have considered the flip. And then lastly, question 4 is the big sweep. How does this all pull together? But how does it pull together to a large set of analytical priorities? These are arrived at based on our own thinking here in Weston, but very much so what other districts are grappling with. I cite here pages 6 to 9 in a larger document. There's a framework already there listing what some of those actually pros and cons are in each of those 14 areas. And then I do flag here page 4 to 5, the real detail on what are 4 very top considerations. And now I'm going to bring in the regional thinking. This afternoon, talking with 2 other district superintendents that are thinking a lot on this and are working on it. They too are trying to get to the 8 o'clock. They think that's the win. They don't see the ability to get to 8:30 as winnable. However, like us, they'll be thinking about it, working on it, because you may say you want to end up at 8:30. But, and we all agree, logistical is too soft a term here. I mean, this is fundamental scheduling and time issues. We may be able to get to 8:30, but we'll have to very seriously grapple with the after-school impact, and particularly if it's a flip where you're pushing it into the 3:20 hour. But we'll go into it very open-minded, but already the regional thinking is, if you really want this, districts that have tried to get to the 8:30, there's only one in the area that's gotten there, and that's Greenwich, and we can understand a lot of the pros and cons of what that's meant there, which we would dig into. Then research information, I want to stress here that we're not going to, the medical research will take that as given. It's very strong, it's very clear on sleep patterns for adolescents. What we want to look at is first our own research base here in Weston, because if you go back to 2009, actually Weston was out in front of a number of districts in making the shift as it did from 7:25 to 7:45. There was a lot of good work in there. Now that's almost a decade ago, so we'd have to freshen that up. We want to pay attention to that work. Plus, since November of 2017, we've been doing our own work, so we want to pay attention to that. There's a lot of information out there on districts that have started to make this adjustment. We would go into that just simply to try and understand our logistical issues, our analytical issues, to try and get an insight on how well we could do this, what we'd have to think about. Spending a lot of time on the research, unless it gets to really applied points, will frankly not be a good use of our time. There are plenty of compendiums out there we can cite and put in any reports to you as a board, so we have that information. But it's going to be critical that Weston dig into and think about how this works for Weston. And that's really where we are. Next steps, we are looking, once I hear from the PTO and WTA, we're looking to schedule the first meeting of the task force at least by the end of late next week, and then get on an every other week rhythm from there. First business of the task force would be to look over the work plan, fine-tune it some, and begin to give to me and others what are the key questions we really want to start to answer within these four broad questions we're using to frame the work. So that's where we are. And again, we'd be trying to bring updates as regularly as possible. As you move into the budget process, it's going to be natural for you to be pressing us on, are you seeing any budget implications of potential issues here? So that's where we are.
Bill, one question. We talk about the research being clear, but we never talk, one of the things we never talk about is what are the tangible outcomes that are being measured when we say that it's beneficial to start later? What are the outcomes that we'd be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is where you've got 4 or 5 district leaders with all kinds of backup looking at this. The medical research, it's very strong in the sense of, adolescent sleep patterns and larger overall health. What you're finding, though, in districts such as Weston, and Wilton will tell you this, and Kevin Smith, and they've been at this for about 8 or 9 years, you see an overall well-being, but you're not seeing the academic bump. And they will say, don't do this if you want an academic bump. Well, fortunately, we're in a position in Weston that's really not, frankly, the top issue. It is our overall wellness. Now, the other than challenge we have, and again, there are superintendents who really, and others want to get into this, you don't have a large enough N out there. You don't have a sample size yet that's large enough to say, yes, the medical research says this, and thus now we're really seeing these implications actually from a lot of districts shifting. Because we're in quite a recent wave. If you think there's some 14,000 districts out there, only a small handful have overcome those big structural challenges to do this. Some urban centers are seeing a bit of an academic bump, but it's still early to tell. But the value in this is that total well-being, which is very important.
Right. What are the quantitative measures that are proxies for total well-being?
I mean, it would be, we can bring that back to you at an early point, but I mean, it would be wellness in terms of, I can bring that back. I mean, absenteeism, other things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit one of the first ones. And then just speaking generally, not necessarily speaking, what we would really look at, but attendance is one. You might look at other behavioral indicators within the day. Some school districts might look at academics, but not necessarily wouldn't necessarily be something that I think we would,
Mhm.
be seeing an uptick
Right.
in. But, you might pull some survey type results as well from students, and some qualitative, focus group information, but,
Right, energy, engagement, all the things that
Yeah.
don't result in numerical outcomes, but that
Absolutely.
are absolutely part of the sphere of influence of the work.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't remember the exact place, but it's one of the school districts in Virginia that did adopt the later start time, and they noticed a decrease in teen drivers in car accidents.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, there's a
Again,
study in
you-
Minnesota on that.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so it's the data is out there. There are positive indicators in all facets of a teen's life, but I don't think you're going to see like GPAs are going to go up by X percent or Y percent. It's just more along the lines of
Yeah.
providing them a
No,
healthier
I
environment.
mean, the reason I asked the question is because we always talk about total well-being, but we don't really talk about what that really means,
Yeah,
that's all.
I mean, I'll take it as a really, I mean, I'm sorry I'm a little rusty on it after spending so many of my years recently on this, but we can bring back sort of a whole set of those indicators. The reality is, so much of it is so early, it's still a little unclear, but it's attendance data, it's,
Right.
attentiveness in the morning, teachers reporting whether this group of students is
Mhm.
more present, I mean, just
Yeah.
literally. being
I
there.
wouldn't do any extra work,
Yeah,
and I don't
no.
think you
Yeah.
should
No,
bring back
but I think
anything.
it's that frankly, the research, I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
But we can pull pretty easily some of these.
I would also add that I think that we leave it to the researchers to aggregate data, qualitative or quantitative, to really show progress, but that we shouldn't underestimate, as Ken said, the value of the qualitative evidence that comes out of focus group work, for example. I mean, it's not always translatable into hard numbers such as GPA bumps, et cetera, but is nonetheless extremely important around wellness. So
Yeah.
the researchers can help us with that. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Is it now the time? I do think it's important to have a board member on the team. I'm happy to discuss this with fellow board members, but I think it would be useful to have a board member represented on that task force. I think that it's so hard sometimes for us to really get our teeth really into it and understand it well from updates, but that if someone on the board, that's just a thought, we can discuss it again. I also wondered about whether or not having a member of the town on the task force, or a parent member. I know a member of the community, parent, either PTO. Is PTO on there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're
there are
on
two
there.
parent representatives.
Parent, okay, thank you. Would there be any reason to think about having, because this really involves more than just the Board of Ed and our extracurricular activities, but also the things that cross-cut across the town, whether to have someone from the town also in the task force worth thinking about? Also, a gesture that we're really making a change here that will impact not only what happens between 7 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, but after that as well. And it's a gesture of,
You mean like someone from Parks and Rec to address
possibly
or
someone
youth?
from Parks and Rec, or yeah. So let's just think about that. The other question I had was, we're entering this discussion, Bill, and this work with the assumption that a change will be made. Is that right? Or is there still
No.
some question
No.
as to whether or not any change would be made?
At least where I sit would be, and I think the administration would join me in this, is it's an open question yet whether we'd make this change. I think in looking at question 1, pros and cons, which is that 8 o'clock, the longer
Yeah.
shift to 8:30 is
Yeah.
question 2. Question 3 is then the flip question, then 4, that's the penultimate question.
Right,
Pulling
right.
it all together, does this add up to be
So there
worth doing? So I think it's still an open question, and I think why it's so critical and open mind is that, I mean, with me for all day are a number of superintendents who would love to do this, but just the getting it all to fit together is why Ridgefield's delayed, New Canaan's delaying, Trumbull's
Right.
delaying, but they're still trying to grapple with it.
I
So-
would just note that after 2 years of discussion, you know, I think it's important to move forward, really erring on the side of making this change, and I'm just speaking bluntly, as opposed to, you know, really feeling like we have to make sure that all the obstacles are clear, that we have to take risks and we have to make some bold decisions after 2 years of discussion on this.
Yeah, I mean, Jeannie Lynn, you may, I think ultimately it'll be the board decision, so that's exactly what you all will
Yeah.
grapple with.
Yeah.
My view is we'll bring you information. There's a good hunch since I brought this recommendation a number of years ago to another board, so I've done this.
Yep, yep.
Recommended keeping it alive and said, here are the things you're going to have to think through, and then said to the board, you're going to need to grapple with this.
Mm-hmm.
It will be one of those decisions where you'll have probably about half happy and half unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way around that because this
Yeah.
is a pretty significant change, especially if you end towards the 8:30. The after-school effects are significant. And so I think I like your idea of bringing someone, and actually I would recommend Parks and Rec. I would urge us as a board, if that's what you're going to do, to kind of modify sooner than later on the task force. You don't have to do it tonight, but
Right.
we are trying to get this moving. But here's how I put it very simply. As of January, I think the board needs to fish or cut bait on this. And have the board
think that's
decide,
right.
at least for the time being, okay, enough talk analysis, yes, we're working on it, or for all these reasons, we're not. You know,
And
so
I think that something that goes along with that is just that I think we need to operate, and we've talked about this before, that we really have to operate with the disposition of leaders in this issue, and that we are going to look at all of the data. We're going to look at evidence. We're going to look at those 14,000 other districts. We're not going to look at all of them, but you know, we're going to really hold up the success stories. We're going to use as cautionary tales some of the real failures from districts that have attempted this, but that we ought to operate on this particular project as leaders, as opposed to looking for groupthink. You know, what does everyone feel we should do? I think we really can move forward with that frame of mind.
Yeah, and what I want to say as far as the 2 years that, unfortunately, we haven't actually had a lot of board discussion in that 2 years. The board asked the administration to get started on this process. They pulled together a lot of preliminary information. And it was a lot of the things that we know the task force is going to have to tackle to be able to address this issue. And we hit an issue nationally that catapulted school security back into being a #1 priority. So we had to shift gears and reassess our reprioritize our work at that moment. So everything kind of stopped. So while we have got a substantial amount of background on this issue, the board has really not entertained any debate or discussion about the merits to or not to make the change, just that we want this process to continue forward so we can get to the point to do that. It's kind of where we are. With respect to having a board member on this particular task force, we kind of go back and forth. Sometimes we have board members on task force and sometimes we don't. When I was speaking with Bill last week, it was kind of my lean to not have a board member on this particular task force because anything they do comes to us, and the 7 of us will debate, discuss, question, and come to a consensus. My concern was if we had a board member on this task force, that it could be viewed that the board was steering what the task force did instead of receiving the information and then us doing our work. This is going to be a topic of conversation that is going to impact every resident in Weston and every employee of the Weston Public Schools. And my feeling was that we really needed to sit back and let the information come to us on both sides of the equation, and then we do our jobs and debate, discuss, and ultimately we make the decision. But I was worried if we had a member on the task force that they could be steering it in some manner instead of us receiving the information and then debating afterwards. That was the train of thought in that process.
Well, I do, and I think that.
Because we can't bring our personal, I don't think we should bring our personal opinion into the task force. Because we have to let the task force be a standalone unit doing its job to bring us the pros and cons of each of these challenges and each of these benefits, and then we evaluate them based on and come to a consensus.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that just, I think this is one of those situations, though, where because the entire district would be impacted so greatly by this change, and that we are ultimately, going to make this decision, and that we're professionals and we're presumably on the board for all the right reasons to be impartial and think fairly about big decisions like this, that anyone who sat on that task force would wear that impartial and professional hat and that role, and would hear both sides and be able to bring that back to the full board as well. So,
But the task force will be reporting back to the full board, so everybody's going to get the information.
I'm quite frankly, I can go either way on this, as long as if we do decide to have a board member on, that we recognize the fact that as a board, our responsibilities are oversight, right? And you have to, whoever on the board participates in that committee has to respect the fact that we're oversight, and that's the role that person would have to play in that. Other than that, I just fear that in any committee, just like, Phase 2 Facilities Committee that we had, it's, I kind of felt a little bit like sometimes, I kind of went into the role of operations rather than oversight, and you gotta, that's something I worry a little bit about from a governance perspective, but other than that, I don't care one way or another, but I think we just have to respect our role as a board, and sometimes our tendency is to overstep a little bit, and as long as we kind of recognize that, I have no problem one way or the other, but that's for you guys to decide.
I'm looking at the rest of you. I mean, I know Tabby has her feeling, but I mean, we need to reach an agreement.
Mhm.
Do you want to have a representative or not?
I'll speak. I'm impartial.
Mhm.
I don't,
Okay.
as long as the information is coming to us
Mhm.
with enough time that we can digest the information and ask critical questions, I'm okay with that.
And it will. And it will. And I mean, and there will be a lot of discussion about this that we're going to be participating in. And all 7 of us, including Ellen, will be getting the full reports from the task force and its recommendations and what they did. So.
Yeah. Unless either
That's
you
fine.
guys want to say anything.
I mean, I hear both sides of it. I mean, I think I tend to come out with Gina on this, just because I think the risk is great that we would be perceived as swaying or that inadvertently or intentionally, and I think that this is a really important issue facing the district, and we've got a lot of people on the committee, and I think I would rather sit in a position to have the information coming to me rather than having it filtered. But
Fine.
that's my personal opinion.
No,
I don't
okay.
feel that strongly about it.
Although I will say this is a very hot committee to be on. I've had a couple of residents reach out to me saying, "How can I actually be on this committee?"
And I hope they followed through on the instructions
so.
about
I
how
gave them the
to get
information.
on board.
I'm just not sure what the value would be, since we're gonna, ultimately find out everything anyway, to then be on that board. You're on there just really to observe. Like, I'm not really sure what you could really contribute. So I guess that would be my question.
It's more of a, and maybe this is just the way I operate, but I just want to make sure we get the depth as much as the breadth of the discussion. So when we receive updates that have top line summary of how things went, that is one way of receiving an update. When one of us is actually in the thick of the discussions, whether we're listening or whether we are participating or advocating. The advocating we can't really do. We have to be very careful, as my colleagues said. But I think that the depth of the discussion is really important for us to understand. So if we don't have a board member on the task force, the burden is then on you, Bill, probably primarily, to really provide us with that depth of the discussion and not just the top line.
Right.
So I'm fine with that, but that is the reason for my advocating for a board member being on board.
If I may, just one point of, I'll make my mistakes on this and try not to get too hung up on the past, but frankly, having done this helps. These are public meetings, and it would be perfectly appropriate for board members to be sitting in on the public meeting if you feel you're intimidating, but I'm actually neutral on this, and this is more, I've stayed silent because the board's got to figure this one out. You need to figure out who's on the task force.
Mm-hmm.
To give you and I'm not hearing the extreme advocacy, and I'm not overstating it. I mean, in Greenwich, you had board members who'd run for the board on this issue and were pushing it hard, and so other board members said, ugh. But then they were sitting in the room to observe, and so that depth, because I agree with you totally. You as a board need to get the depth and the breadth on this. And that's purposely why this was written up as, it had to be anyway, but it's a public meeting, publicly noticed, and anybody on the task force has to understand that, and you have full right as board members to be sitting in there and gathering it that way. So yes, I would work very hard, and I'm not alone from who's it, you'll have Phil and Ken also bring in color, feeling, and all the rest, so we're not, so even if you felt you don't want to be sitting in the room, but it's public, so
Right.
we'll work hard to get you that
No, I think
color
that's
and
fair.
flavor.
Thank you, that's fair.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair compromise.
I have a comment and then a question. When reading the research and information base, I appreciate you including that you will spend the time to look at other success stories. Granted, we will absolutely, it goes without saying, do the best for what we feel is for Weston. But obviously, we're going to make smarter decisions, understanding the success and failures of others. With that, I actually would be particularly interested when you're doing some of this background and getting some of the insight, is we've got some districts in our DERG that have multiple start times for lower schools. And so I would just be curious when you're giving us that depth and that color, is particularly how they feel about having two different start times for elementary schools or K through 5, because they live it and breathe it every day. I'm assuming it's transportation related, right? They can't get all those buses to all those schools and then to middle school on time. So, and then we have some schools. I mentioned last year when we had this discussion that Saugatuck started at Saugatuck Elementary School in Westport. Started at 7:45. This year they actually pushed it back to an 8 o'clock start. They pushed it back 15 minutes. So just some of those stories that's going to provide us some color. So that's my one comment. My question is instructional time up for discussion during this task force?
Again, the facts and the experience, if you go to 8:30, 8:35, you will have to start talking about instructional time. That is the big, and I think,
because there are differences when
no, you're going to have to do that,
Right.
because you'll hear from, and it's all co-curriculars, and I think it's a great idea to get someone from the town on, because Parks and Rec will be directly affected by this.
Mhm.
That it pushes everything, 8:30 will push everything back 45, 50 minutes. You
Okay.
can begin to get the effect. But and Mark Burke was already done a lot of work on this, but he'll be reporting on, you're going to have more demands on lights. You're going to have more demand. Well, I'm not saying don't do this.
Yeah.
Please, don't hear it as I'm just laying out the facts. Greenwich created an opportunity period at the end of the day because their athletes and others had to leave, were constantly leaving early. So they now have changed that. So they basically have sacrificed that last period. So they've cut back on instructional time. Now but that's the study. You may be getting, more for less
Yeah.
in that case.
It was
And-
new to me
but
when I,
yeah, at eight, you probably don't have that conversation.
yeah, yeah,
You'd flag it as check, we don't really need to go there.
yeah.
But it's so, I'm sorry, too many words, but the simple answer is we will have, at 8:30, 8:35, we will have to talk about that. And I
Yeah.
do like very much your question about, even without the start times, who has the elementary starting as early as 7:45?
Right.
What's the feel of that?
Yeah.
And
I mean, not having children in high school yet, I thought instructional time was across the board the same, maybe at a state level. I was surprised when looking across DERG, even just, like, I'm even noting some 15-minute differences in high school, it was just news to me, so that's why it prompted my question on, do we need to have that conversation?
Yeah, just to quickly answer that question, there's a minimum number of hours
Okay.
required by the state, and then at the district level, contractually, you negotiate the length of the day,
Okay,
but making sure that you have the required number of hours for the year
got it.
and the required number of days.
So any further preliminary stuff before we hand this over to Bill to run with?
I mean, I do have a question. Are you comfortable with me reaching out? I would suggest Parks and Rec,
I think they would be good because they would have a handle on
and that'd be
Being
Joe
a-
most likely.
a liaison with all the youth, with all of the Weston youth sports organizations and field usage by all the youth teams. They would be able to provide that sort of information.
And the other approach, again, I'm neutral on this. The other approach, because I intentionally listed a resource group, would be to list them within the resource group if they're comfortable with that. But if you'd rather see them on the task force,
I mean, I just think they have however you want to get the information. I think they
okay.
have relevant information.
Well, why don't I have the conversation with them and see where they feel best positioned? Because I mean, it's an excellent point. I should have at least been listing them as a resource. So I'll reach out to Joe and see. Okay. Okay, anything else?
No, I'm very happy we're finally moving this forward again.
So you ready, Ken?
We're ready.
Phil, wherever you are, you ready?
Start your engines.
So it's a lot of work. I just would, this is, it's exciting work. It really is. It is a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
All right, the next item on our agenda is our second 2020 financial update. Since we do not have a sitting director of finance and operations at the table, our chair of our
I'm in.
finance committee is going to run with this report this evening.
I'm gonna do my best, Rich Rudel, and
All right? No,
You're now Phil Cross.
you're Phil Cross now.
Yeah, looking forward for Phil joining and doing this next month. So I'm going to do my best to summarize the August 2019 financial report. Year to date, we've spent $6,165,135. We have encumbrances of $42,152,515. And we have an additional anticipated spend of $5,014,631, which gives you a total expected spend for the year of $53,332,278, which puts us about $258,000 over budget. And I'll get to that in a second, because I think we kind of ran through that last month without much of an explanation. If you look at the transfers for the month, the zero-sum changes of the transfers from one category to the other added to $452,539. August and September are big months for transfers. Most of it has to do, like $434,000 had to do with just staff turnover and location of staff. So I expect probably, next month to have, probably the final kind of movements in terms of staff turnover. Now to the over budget of $258,568. It's I think last month, we really didn't explain this too well. It's not that we just started the year and ran up a budget deficit. It's basically because we had 4 additional special ed paras due to student needs that came up between when the budget closed and when the school year began. Maybe, Mike, you might want to talk a little bit about that so that everyone's aware of why we're, over budget by $258,000 now.
Sure. So you are right that it is related to the additional increased need for paraprofessionals for students receiving special education services. As you know, as a district, we are committed to and responsible for meeting the individual needs of every student. When the budget is built, as we move into September, October, November, we anticipate those needs as best as possible and plan accordingly through the budget process. However, those needs change and can change for a variety of reasons. One can be simply the individual performance of a child and the needs that may surface as a result. Other possibilities for change include students moving into district and perhaps having an IEP coming from a neighboring district or even a district far away that has a certain amount of services allocated within that IEP, and then Weston needing to adopt those services, move forward, meet the needs of that child, and then of course over time adjust the IEP as necessary as a student adjusts to Weston, hopefully makes good progress and a good transition, and we can program accordingly from that point. So it is correct that this year we have had to add additional staff, paraprofessionals. That is showing up in the financial report as Tony described. We will continue to monitor not only the staffing needs, but also the performance of the children to make sure that we are providing them what it is that they need to make appropriate progress and report back as necessary.
Yeah. And it's not uncommon that this happens at the beginning of the year, and we work during the year to make sure that we flatten out the budget over time. In terms of the Internal Services Fund, we had $96,000 of claims, $1.7 thousand or almost $2,000 of administrative fees. So the fund balance now went from $1.537 million to $1.439 million, still in healthy shape. Be happy to answer questions to the extent I can.
Could I have a motion, please?
Move that the Board of Education approve the second fiscal year 2020 financial update and approval of transfers.
May I have a second? Thank you, Tony. Any further questions or comments? Great. All in favor? Bill, I just have a administrative comment. At our FinCom meeting, the summary letter that we're now being presented, can we have that added into the CABE software? Because that was a very useful document.
It's this one. This right here.
Yeah.
Oh, that should have gone in. It didn't go in?
No, I'm only seeing the big
All right, we'll
one
get-
out of the system,
Meredith,
and that's
can we-
just a very
Yeah,
helpful
no,
report.
that should, anything you get should go in. Just
Yeah, we
check
should
with
do the
Andrew.
summary. We should,
Yeah, everything just double check with Andrew.
yeah, we
Is that
should do
okay,
the
Meredith?
summary page.
Yeah, just has, anything you see as a committee has to get posted and.
Yeah.
Well, just particular, that is a very
Oh, yeah.
useful
Helpful
document.
Well,
It-
that's the
it's
direction, well, we'll see what
Each-
Phil
each
wants to
meeting.
do with you all, but that's the
Mhm.
direction we're going. That's kind of
Yeah.
thing to thank, actually, the Board of Finance has asked just to see that.
Mhm.
But policy and procedure-wise, anything you see in a committee needs to get posted here, so
Yeah.
we'll follow up with Andrew.
Okay.
Yeah, usually what, I think that this kind of started and was evolved through the committee, and if, and I think this is also an evolving document as people
Mhm.
find that there's more useful information to put in the summary,
Mhm.
we can kind of add it to
Agreed.
this.
Agreed. I just, when I was double
Yeah,
checking,
no,
we
that's a
should
good catch.
have that. Thank you. I appreciate that. Old business. Actually, are starting the year fairly clean on that front, so we have now reached the superintendent's report. Bill?
Okay, so since it's only 8:40, that gives me, 2 hours to talk? One thing I will say on time, I really appreciate the board's decision to have us do the recognitions twice a year. I'm really looking forward to that being, yes, a board meeting, but recognition focused. because you can see it'll focus things correctly. It'll focus on the families and the students and let us celebrate, and lets you focus on the work here. And I had asked the students to go a little longer than usual, and I said, don't be shy to take about 10 minutes, because I think we've bought more time in the meeting. And I think you're likely, as you heard tonight, to have some real substantive input on school start end time, other things like that. So I mean, Lisa and I had a really wonderful meeting with them last week. So I'm really pleased. Every year it's been wonderful to have them at the table, but I don't want to jinx them by being so positive, but I'm optimistic they'll really bring a lot to it. I had sent out the super notes. I just want to highlight a couple things that are in those super notes. They went out, you know what time they went out, Saturday morning. But anyway, the transportation update, you know, thanks to Craig on that, who I've redeployed a bit over on this. We're tightening it down. The key thing for as a board is we know exactly now what went on as to why we did not open as well as we should have with this. It really, I'm very disappointed by it, frankly, and not anyone sitting here at this table, because we worked so hard in all the ways not to have the poor opening we had last year, and we did that everywhere but here. And I think actually the total number of students affected by this is small, but I think you've heard me say somewhere, once I knew kindergartners were affected, it was the end of it for me. I just was very upset. So we know exactly what went on. It's not going to happen again next year. We've worked very closely with the first student. Again, I want to thank Craig for really stepping up. This was not his job. He stepped into the breach. He's helped figure out what went wrong. We continue to work on that. I've laid that out here, but I want you to know, because I'm not going to pull you into management too much, we've already set that date for November 13th to have the principals together with me, the first student, Craig, to say, now let's back map from the second week of August. It's when all the routes got to be done, tried, figured out, practiced, so that we don't have this problem again. I will say, and I put the possessive pronoun in the wrong place, it's multiple districts are seeing transportation issues, because what's catching up with us now is the driver shortage. So even if you have the drivers, this has been an issue hitting us nationwide. It's caught up with us a bit. We also know we're paying a little bit less than other drivers in our new contracts. We got to pay attention to that going forward. So there are a couple things we really are figuring out here. So we also are tightening down the communication, and when the new buses get here, there'll be some built-in corrections. I don't know, Craig, if you want to add to that at all, so I'm not speaking wrong, i.e. the apps, you know.
So, beginning with the new buses, we'll have.
Craig, please use your microphone for our audiences.
You would think I would know that.
Yes.
Yeah, beginning with the new buses, there will be an apps that will be available to all the families to actually track the location of the buses. They will be attached to a program called Zonar. And in addition, there will also be consoles available to each of the schools. So the schools will be able to see where the buses are, plus parents will be able to see when the buses actually leave the school. Because as Bill said, one of the things we're identifying too is the idea of when the buses leave the school and how that actually relates to the actual time published for when they arrive at their bus stop.
So just a question, the app will cover all of our buses, not just the 11 new buses?
It will cover, when rolled out, it will cover all the buses.
Great, thank you.
When will it be rolled out?
Most likely November.
The other things in the update I just want to stress, meaning the super notes, is good news front. Counseling is off to a great start. I think a very good newsletter. It featured the Camp College this summer. I mean, we have this incredible windfall in our career counselor, you know, who we landed there, and I see Mike agreeing. I mean, we really landed one of the best in the tri-state, 5-state, 20-state area, and she just really is wonderful, building on a really good team that's there. That's a high-stakes issue for us here in Weston, that we provide high-quality counseling, so that is a plus. I knew nothing about it till I saw it on Instagram, but I was just very, very proud of how we handled the climate change action. We were visible, we were present, and we did it in a way to complement learning here. I'm not opposed to student strikes, but you know, I think they handled it in a wonderful way. I'm not sure my sloppy use of technology let you get to the Instagrams. You may have gotten there on your own, but I just tried to give you a flavor of what was there. And again, I complimented Lisa for that. She put it off on others and said, well, Lisa, take the compliment when you're building and your faculty and staff do well. Because I think it was and they managed to thread that needle of taking a stance on something in a way that's for all of us, not to make it partisan or whatever. It was just very well done. A lot of us meet quite regularly with the WTA. As I meet with Doug and the executive committee, I'll flag that for you. I'll just flag generally the points because that is a place we can have some privacy, but I do want to flag, we did talk about 4 items. Certainly copying, technology, summer pay schedule, which when Lewis is back we will work on, and when Phil's here, there may not be a solution to that. And then professional development planning and scheduling, which Ken's been working on. Ken was part of that meeting. And actually, some of those questions are ones the administrators had raised just as much. Moving past that update, whenever a superintendent is out of district for almost 2 full days, you better tell people what you're doing. Today, and I'll be back tomorrow with the Southern Fairfield County Superintendents Association. They brought in for the 2nd year running a national individual, Doug Eady, who is an expert on governance issues. He does a lot of his work in all kinds of not-for-profits, somewhat in education, and he's pushing us. He's pushing us to say, you are substantially CEO superintendents, and about 30% of your time better be spent working with your boards on helping them be as effective as possible. He really pushed us today, 2nd year in a row, on, yes, have committees. He really values those, but have committees that roughly would be 3 committees: a planning committee, a monitoring committee, and an engagement committee. And don't have committees that are curriculum or finance or policy or facilities or communications, because all you've done is create silos. And boy, did the room get lively when he started pushing us on that, and we'll work more on it tomorrow. And then I said, well, last year I brought some of those ideas back, and it's hard to digest. And he said, well, Bill, I never told you to bring them right back. So this is a tough go. But it is a fascinating discussion on the kinds of things he's pushing us as superintendents to work on. And it is a little self-serving to talk about the superintendents and the boards, but that ripples out to all of the administrators. So what I'll do is, after we're done tomorrow at some point, either through the right committees, I'll talk with Gina about when it's best to bring the board into that discussion. Don't worry, I'm not going to race and say form 3 committees, but it is a fascinating, the concept is right. Now, final comment, when Mr. Eady was pressed, as Tony, you might have pressed him, and a certain superintendent, not me, pressed him on, now where is K through 12 doing that kind of structure? And I really like Mr. Eady. We actually worked together in Cleveland by pure chance. He kind of hemmed and hawed and said, well, actually not a lot of K-12 has done this, but that doesn't mean you don't do it. So, it's very powerful pushing and thinking, and it's allowing us as superintendents to get to know each other better, to be a resource on things like school start and end time. So I will now segue just to remind you that the principal reports we've shifted to every other month. The principals asked for that. I think it's a good idea. Gives them a little more space to report to you on, and I think that's a plus. I see you agreeing, which I'm glad to see. So that's the principal's report, and my report, and everybody's report.
So committee reports, negotiations, we are moving along with finalizing everything with the WTA, and we should be back with details and hopefully everything wrapped up with that in the not too distant future. If any of my other chairs have any information they want to present, I know we're just now getting started with our committees for the year, just raise your hand. Ruby, I would definitely like for you to speak about the WEF fundraiser. I actually had a kid come home from school, we got to go do this.
Yay!
And I was like, well, wow. I was like, we already have our VIP courtside tickets.
Yeah.
So yes, please talk about the Harlem Wizards.
Yes, Harlem Wizards. So I'm going to back up for a second, just for those of anyone out there watching, about the Weston Education Foundation. That is an independent foundation. They are their own 501c3. Of their almost 25 years in existence, they've given almost $950,000 back to this community. So a huge number. Majority of their money is given back to the educational system, but they also support the community at large, giving back to places like the Historical Society, Le Chat Farm, and even individual grants that come through even at the student level, which is fantastic. But so they are sponsoring this event. It's going to be an amazing community event, and they have said all net proceeds from this event will come back to the school system, which is fantastic. So the event is the Harlem Wizards versus Weston's Brainy Bunch. So we are getting, we're asking for teachers to participate from all 4 schools. Mr. Rizzo has kindly agreed to be on the Brainy Bunch, and they will play 5 of professional basketball players. Now, it'll be like the Harlem Globetrotters. It will be a fantastic event with live DJ, lively music, quite the show, an announcer, and October 5th at 5 p.m. And there's also an opportunity to be a whiz kid. I don't know if you got this too. Okay, so any child who purchases a jersey can come down on the floor with the basketball players and with them during warm-up and then throughout the game as they call on you. So it's going to be a really, really exciting community event. So I hope to see you guys there.
And speaking of community events, Friday night we have another home football game. And for anybody who was in the stands at our first game 2 weeks ago, the entire stadium was full, people standing everywhere along the fence, all ages of children represented. It was just a wonderful, wonderful community evening in Weston, and the team is home again this Friday. So really, really a fun night if you're looking for something to do with the kids. It's really a lot of fun. Next meetings?
Any committee reports beyond?
I don't think so. Nobody?
So for October, just to review, October 7th, we have the workshop. Phil will be here for that. It will be an active focus on the budget. I've talked, well, just sort of review, so I'll know there will be 3 parts to the agenda. Well, obviously it is posted, but with more specifics. One will be all of you working with cabinet, reflecting on last year's budget process, ups, downs, and what might be better. Second part, we'll be looking at the pro forma for the upcoming FY21 budget, and that pro forma will give you a sense if even we just stand still what the growth would be. And that, I think, will then prompt what I hope is a discussion, not to have you vote on what you have an appetite for by way of growth, but just to give you a sense of things and give us a sense of things. And then third part would be how we communicate with you, since all our business on this has to get done in public, how we communicate with you in this year's budget process around any thoughts, ideas for any shifts in what is the recommended budget level. So I'm looking forward to that. Phil is working on that pro forma for you. The other thing is, while the Finance Committee did look at, in its last meeting, the budget calendar, that's still draft, because there are some aspects of that budget calendar that we do have to nail down. And I need to remember to get that to the principals, actually. They've asked for that. They need to get moving on certain things, but there are aspects of that calendar that we, as a board, you may want to have some little flexibility on. But very specifically, the budget assumptions, which you'll vote on at the October 21st meeting. You'll vote on the budget calendar on October 21st, and then you'll also vote on the budget assumptions. And I see a typo here. It's the FY21 budget calendar that Phil asked specifically that you hold off. We hold off on the assumptions. Typically, you might vote on those in September, but wait until after that workshop, which I thought was a good idea. So that leads me to then October 21st meeting. The big set of work for you will be the Gauging Student Progress Report. Ken will lead you through that. And then the others will be, as I've just mentioned, the 2 discussions around the budget assumptions and the budget calendar. But hopefully that will be fairly in place after the workshop.
Thank you. And I think that somehow or another it is just at 9 o'clock, and I think we are done for the evening. Could I have a motion, please? Motion to adjourn. May I have a second? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.